All right, this afternoon, we're going to talk about chapters 4, 5, and 6. To cut to the chase, chapter 4 is talking about ethical and social responsibility. Chapter 5 will talk about how to form a business, three basic forms of business in the United States. And then chapter 6, entrepreneurship and starting a small business. So let's look at the objectives for this chapter 4. Explain why obeying the law is only the first step in behaving ethically. Ask the three questions you need to answer when faced with a potentially unethical action. Describe management's role in setting ethical standards. Distinguish between compliance-based and integrity-based ethics codes. And there are 6 steps there to setting one up. Define corporate social responsibility and compare corporations' responsibilities to various stakeholders. I think that's probably with various stakeholders. And then analyze the role in U.S. businesses in influencing ethical behavior and social responsibility in global markets. We'll talk a little bit about that. I want you to know that's not an easy thing to do. We can take the lead. We don't always do as good a job as we should in doing things of that nature. We've had a lot of scandals since 2000. We had scandals before 2000, so it's not just the 21st century that brought us to scandals. We've had Enron, we've had Adelphia, we've had WorldCom, we've had some in the trading business. That just escaped me. I couldn't think of the right name there for a second, so I'm going to let it go. And certainly we've had Bernie Madoff that everybody knows about. One of the things that we talk about first here about Bernie Madoff is what he ran, and that was known as a Ponzi scheme. Just simply to say a Ponzi scheme is like a pyramid. To make a Ponzi scheme work, you have to get a lot of people in at the base, the bottom of a pyramid, come up slowly to the apex, where people at the top are actually being paid on the proceeds put into the scheme by those at the lower level. And as you can see, it's continually perpetuating itself. If you don't have people continuing to come in and get into the scheme, then eventually it's going to fold on its own. This is not part of business, but what I want to tell you is that there was a gentleman who wrote to the Securities and Exchange Commission when Bernie Madoff said that he promised his investors a 10% return on their investment year after year after year after year after year. The United States stock market has never done that. And he said that his scheme, he didn't call it a scheme, he said his scheme was couldn't be done. And Securities and Exchange Commission unfortunately didn't pay attention to him, and we know what happened. At least $10 billion were lost. This is what talks here a little bit about the Ponzi scheme. I'm not going to go over it again. Actually, Ponzi scheme is named after an Italian immigrant to the United States who started these things back in the 1920s, or perhaps just a little bit earlier. This is important for you to know. What are ethics? And I don't normally read what's on the slides word for word, but this one's one we have to get in our minds. It's the standards of moral behavior that are accepted by society as being right versus wrong. So it's something we want to keep in our minds. What society is saying is right versus wrong. What that simply means is that the great preponderance of us, the great majority, while we're not getting into, excuse me, just a second, majority, the majority rules. What this is saying is that across the board, numerous people agree to what's right versus what's wrong, and that crosses all sorts of cultural boundaries, national boundaries, religious boundaries, etc. These are some basic moral values, and I'm not going to go over these for you. You can read them. I think the first one is very important on the right, and that is integrity. And then we have things like cheating, cowardice, and cruelty on the other side. This particular slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. It's just one of those, like I like to call gee whiz slides, different companies that were called on the carpet due to bribery and other type things. And I'm not going to go into that particular slide either. What I am going to talk about is this particular slide, and I think each of us needs to understand this. And that is, when you're in an organization, I don't care whether it's an academic institution like I'm in, or a for-profit organization, or a government organization, or a nonprofit organization, ethics begins at the top. If our leaders are not exhibiting moral behavior, ethical behavior, we can't expect anybody down the line to do the same. Well, make that a little clearer. We can't expect anybody down the line to be any more ethical than what they see at the top. And people see people at the top doing things they shouldn't be doing, whether that's minuscule or major, and they're not being punished for it. Everybody thinks, well, I can do the same thing. And too often what we see, it's the little guy or the middle guy or gal who gets punished, and the boys and girls on top don't. There are two kinds of ethical codes. There's a compliance-based code, which simply says we're going to follow the law, whatever the law is, and we're going to adhere to that. And anybody who is punished, anybody who transgresses the law, we're going to punish or see that they're punished. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the classic example, and by the way, I don't take any credit for this classic example, and you'll understand why in just a few seconds. Slavery was legal in the United States until it was outlawed by amendments to the Constitution of the United States. Was slavery moral or ethical? The answer is absolutely, unequivocally no. So that's why I want you to see that simply following the law doesn't do things. That doesn't mean we're being ethical. It simply means we're following the law. Now, I'm sure that each of you can come up with as good an example as the one I just gave. But we need to keep this in our mind. And when we're dealing with customers as the representatives of a company, or we're leading a company or organization or institution, whatever it has to be, we have to be above following the law. I'm not saying we don't or shouldn't follow the law, but we have to be above that. And that's where we get to integrity-based codes. These things are based upon, as you can see on the slide, the values of the company, what it stands for. This is what we aspire to. We have shared beliefs here. We believe in, in accountability and responsibility. And that's how we're going to act. Yes, if people transgress this, we're going to see that they're held to account and punished as necessary. But it's above the law. Yeah, we're going to follow the law, but we're saying that these things are even more than the law. A little story, I'm sorry I didn't bring this in, because it's one of my favorite stories. It goes back to a course I took in graduate school in the 1980s. Mars Candy, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, M&Ms, had a buyer who was in South America to buy cocoa beans. Came upon a broker who was down on his luck. And so he said, well, instead of paying you the normal amount of money, we'll take those beans off your hand for $30,000, $40,000 less than what we normally pay. So if we normally pay you $150,000 for those beans, we're going to pay you $120, $110. And the guy needed the money, so he signed a contract. The buyer goes back to headquarters at Mars in Virginia and thinks he'll be patted on the back. And instead, they told him, we don't do business like that. We don't take advantage of people. We may be in the same situation. Tore up the contract, went back to the broker, said, put the normal price in here. That's what we're going to do. that was called what Mars called it, one of its 5 principles. It's ethical conduct, simply put. Now, this is just talking here about how we improve business ethics. And by the way, you can look in your text and you can see the ways of building a corporate ethical standard. And that you find out beginning on page 101. And this is where we're going to talk about it here. Management has to say, this is what we're going to do. This is our code of conduct. It's published. Every employee has a copy of it. We expect everybody to act accordingly and ethically. Everybody must be trained, and ethical considerations must be taken into account when making business decisions. There should be an ethics office set up within an organization. Now, of course, if you're not going to find a small organization simply because they can't afford that. They can't afford a separate office. Now, that doesn't mean to say that small organizations should not have integrity codes of ethical conduct. They should. You're probably just not going to see an ethics office. Can you mute your phone so we don't get that feedback, please? Thank you. We want to get other people involved in setting up this ethical code. People like vendors and contractors, subcontractors, customers, etc. And we may not say we want you to write this code, but we might want to say, what do you think of this? How do you think we should proceed? Does this meet your needs? Ethical codes have to be enforced. And that goes for compliance-based codes, if that's all you're going to do, and it certainly goes for integrity-based codes. People have to know the standards. They have to know they're expected to be held to the standards, and what's going to happen to them if they don't adhere to standards. This just talks about whistleblowers, and I really don't want to spend a lot of time about this because this could really take us a long period of time to talk about. Unfortunately, in the United States, people who blow the whistle are the ones that turn out to be the culprit instead of the person bringing the shady practices to light. They're vilified, they're excoriated, they're extricated, they become pariahs. And unfortunately, that should never happen. Yeah, I know sometimes people blow the whistle because they're trying to get back, it's revenge and things of that nature. But by and large, people who are whistleblowers usually take the high road and are trying to point things out. And many times the reason they do what they do is because they've taken these actions to their superiors internally and nothing happened. Happened with the case of cigarette tobacco. And a number of other cases in corporate America. Corporate social responsibility is something a little bit different than an ethics. Yeah, it's wrapped around ethics. It's part of ethics. It's things about that. But notice what it says here. It's the concern that organizations, now mostly what we're talking about here are for-profit organizations, show concern for not only for the business, but for the welfare of society. If you stop and think about this, no business would be in business if society didn't embrace it. And so this has come into business corporate America's thought process in the past 20 or so years. What do we need to give back to society? If it is society that keeps us in business, we need to think about maybe we need to take care of society so society sees us as a good corporate steward of the environment and other things. I like to bring up here about global warming. I don't particularly care whether you believe in global warming or not. What I do care that you believe in is the fact that we have one planet. Most of our resources are finite, meaning they're going to run out sometime. Maybe not in my lifetime, probably not in your lifetime, but they're going to run out. And we have to be good stewards of what we have. And this is what corporate social responsibility is talking about. Talking about good stewardship of resources, treating communities well, doing things for communities, giving back. And this is something that societies have to, excuse me, businesses have to think about. Notice what this first slide says. This first bullet on this particular slide says, corporate social responsibility includes everything from making sure that the workforce mirrors, now I'm saying it differently than what's on the slide, mirrors the area in which we do business. And so if your area is 50% minority or greater, shouldn't your workforce resemble that? I mean, I would think so. I mean, that just makes common sense. Now, maybe you can't get the 50% because education, technology, and a few other things, but you ought to have a plan in place to get there, and show the community that you're striving to meet its needs. And of course, corporate social responsibility also talks about addressing political and social needs of the organization. This is some slide here, but I want you to pay attention to some information on the slide, but I want you to pay attention to the third bullet here. The majority of Masters of Business Administration students said they would take a lower salary to work for a socially responsible company. Now, if that's true, I'm not saying it is and I'm not saying it's not, but if it is true, that is a blatant shift from what we have seen in the past. So what we're saying here is that maybe we've shifted our focus, not away from profit, but understanding that with profit goes responsibility, and a responsibility to give back to the community in which we operate. This is just another, I like to call gee whiz slides about different celebrities who are generous. And these are also generous people. Then we have here President Kennedy's 4 basic rights for consumers. There is a lot of yin and yang in Washington about whether or not we have to have a consumer protection agency. Now, one side says, well, business will take care of this. And the other side says, well, we really can't trust business to do that unless we put some rules in place. I wish there were a common ground, or at least a middle ground. Unfortunately, when it comes to political footballs like this, there doesn't seem to be. But one of the things that he enumerated here are right to safety. I mean, we should expect the products that we buy to be safe. We need to know about how the products work and any problems that the products have. Obviously, the right to choose. We can choose whatever we want. We can choose to buy. We can choose not to buy. We can go with a competitor or not go with a competitor. And finally, and this is one that is becoming very difficult, and that's the right to be heard. If we have a complaint, we need to be able to take it to someone. You've had a complaint with a company, you've gone and you've not gotten any redress. What happened? Got buried someplace, maybe not on purpose, but it got buried. I'll give you a little example of what I consider to be corporate social responsibility, or at least responsibility to a consumer. My wife has a fair complexion and has used Dove soap ever since I've known her. And that's a long time, by the way. One time she was taking a shower and got some scrapes on her arm and got a jeweler's glass out and found out there was some iron shavings inside the bar. So she called Dove and told them what the problem was. Whoever she talked to, customer representative, said, please put it in the box, wrap it up, ship it back to us. We'll reimburse you for the shipping. So they did, and they sent my wife a certificate, I guess, for lack of a better term, for three bars of Dove soap at no charge. Well, it wasn't too long after that, within a month, we got my wife did, we got a cooler filled with products made by, I don't know, Dove, it's Unilever, I think, made by them, and a note in there that said, we want to make sure that we made amends to you by showing you that we appreciate what you did and telling us of the problem, and make sure that we've remunerated you as well as we possibly can. So what Unilever, again, I think that's who makes Dove, was saying is, we appreciate what our customer service representative did, but we're going to take this a step further to make sure we keep you as a customer. That's kind of what social responsibility is. It goes back to being heard. It goes back to a lot of things. This is just telling you how you know whether you've made contact or not. Here's do's and don'ts of social customer contact using Twitter, etc. Don't stick with the facts. Don't cause any problems. Now, this particular slide here talks about insider trading, which is a real problem. As you may know, if you pay attention to news, some years ago, Martha Stewart was jailed, convicted and jailed for insider trading a company known as ImClone. I won't go into the whole thing. As far as I was concerned, she was really small potatoes, and they weren't talking about large amounts of money. The gentleman they show here, Stephen Cohen, you can see his picture on page 105, has been accused of doing some insider trading with his private equity firms. Mr. Cohen is very wealthy, owns several firms. He has been sanctioned by the Securities and Exchange Commission. They reached an agreement where he will no longer be managing other people's money, but he's allowed to manage his own money. And this has been a real problem with these folks in this employer security, and I can't think of the exact name for this for these people, but they get some inside information that you and I are not privy to and will never get, and they start making trades, buying or selling based upon this information that they have. That's what insider trading is. Now, if you and I were in on this whole scheme, which would literally mean that every other person would be in on whatever scheme it is, then it wouldn't be insider trading, because each of us would have an equal opportunity to buy or sell stock. Now, maybe not at the same rate, not in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, et cetera, but we would have the same opportunity. Now, this is different than an insider acting on his or her own knowledge, not passing it along to somebody else, and deciding to buy or sell stock in the company in which he or she is employed. That's a little bit different. This insider is when this person gets information that's not available to the general public and acts upon it to either make a good profit or stave off a huge loss. Whether or not responsibility to employees creates job and promotes upward mobility, I really don't know. I think the jury is probably still out on that. But that does not mean that employers should not be socially responsible to their employees. Employers need employees. I think we'll find that in some cases as the future moves and the artificial intelligence moves, we'll see maybe fewer employees. It's not going to affect me, and it may not affect you, but we may see that. But we still need the humans, and we still need to treat humans as the most important resource that they are. And treating them any other way is probably not a good idea. Now, let me stop and talk about just a second. I want you to put this into your thought process. There's a big movement in the country today about having a living wage, and the people are talking about $15 an hour, which is a little bit more than double the current minimum wage. And the response from a lot of businesses is, well, if we do that, we're going to have to raise prices. Well, yes, that's probably true. And there are both sides of the story as to whether or not raising the minimum wage to a living wage, now whether $15 an hour is a living wage depends upon where you live. Is it the socially responsible thing to do? Well, if you have to stop and think, or if you do stop and think, not that you have to, that a lot of people at the bottom end of the rung, economic rung, have to pay for childcare, have to pay for transportation, among all the other things that they have to do. And those things eat a lot of money. Maybe we should think about, or maybe corporations should think about raising the wage to a living wage. This is not a political rant on my part. Please do not take it to be that way. I just think we have to really stop and think about what we're doing and the type of people we want. You know, you can't go into a fast food restaurant and work as a cashier or somebody else if you don't know how to operate computers and a few other type things. And so you're not going to get somebody who just doesn't know anything to come in and work in those positions simply because they're not trainable, they're not reliable, and a few other things. So if you really want people to be reliable and to remain with you over a period of time, you ought to think about paying a decent wage and offering decent benefits. I'm not trying to say that corporate America doesn't deserve to make a profit. I'm just saying that I think that they need to rethink what they're doing, especially when it comes to people in that area. Yes, that's an opinion. It's not meant to be politics, and I'm not trying to sway anybody one way or another. I'm just trying to give you my philosophy on what I think corporations ought to do. If you want good employees, you need to pay them well. This is a slide that gives us America's most admired companies in 2014. There's a big problem that we have, and that's fraud. Look at what that says. Fraud costs businesses about 5% of annual revenues and causes over 30% of all business failures. That's a huge, huge number. Now, we know that starting a business is difficult. And if you get people who are into fraud and don't care for whatever reason they're committing fraudulent acts, that's really going to become a problem. This just kind of goes back and presages what I already said about the environment. We have one. We're not going to get another. And we have to do whatever we can to protect what we have. Saying it's somebody else's job is simply not accepting responsibility. This is just talking about companies that are going green. Look at the bottom bullet there. Expect as many as 40 million green jobs just 14 years from now. That's really just around the corner when we stop and think about it. This is just talking about sustainability and people doing things that they that they want to do to help protect the environment, and companies doing like that, like reusable bags at grocery stores and supermarkets and things of that nature. This is a social audit. There's 5 types of watchdogs. I'm not going to go through that list because you can see it yourself. It's in the text. Some things that we need to think about, that we need to talk about. We need to take up and take responsibility when we see people not doing things right. And we find the companies are doing things that aren't working well either. International ethics is the big thing. One of the things that many of you said that separates standard of living between industrialized countries and those that are not was corruption. And it's something we have to be concerned about. We have to understand that the United States businesses doing business overseas are bound by the 1970s Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. If you can't do certain things in the United States, you can't do it overseas either if you're an American company. A lot of complaint about that, but you know, we should be held to a higher standard and we shouldn't be concerned about that. This is just going by a different standard, which you can find in your text. Again, not something I'm going to spend any time on. That brings us to the end of chapter 4. Are there any questions? All right, thank you. I'm going to take a short break just for a second or just for about a minute or so, and we'll come back and start on chapter 5, which I think will be a very interesting chapter for you, how to farm a business. So please come back. It's 4:59 now. Please come back at 5:01. Give us a chance to catch our breath, and we'll get back to chapter 5. Thank you. All right, 5:01. I just want to remind you that there is a chat feature. You can type something in, and I'll try to answer it while we're talking. How to farm a business. We're going to talk about the 3 basic forms of business in the United States. The learning objectives for this chapter compare the advantages and disadvantages of sole proprietorship. We'll talk about the differences between different types of partnerships. Look at the advantages and disadvantages of corporations and the difference between C corporations, S corporations, and limited liability companies. These are the 3 major forms of ownership in the United States: sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. Notice on this particular slide, which you can see at the bottom of page 120, that almost 3/4 of the businesses in the United States are owned by a sole proprietor. On the other side of that, while corporations make up 20%, corporations take in 80% of the total receipts, and sole proprietorships only 6%. This particular slide just talks about good places for minorities to open firms, and we're not going to spend any time on that. This is a sole proprietorship, and this gives us our advantages. I'm not going to go through that laundry list for you because you can see that on page 121. But you have freedom here. I think that's a big thing to look at. You start the business whenever you want. You can end the business whenever you want. You can change the style of the business, etc. And then the other thing is, the last thing, and just as important, there are no special taxes here. You're taxed as an individual, so you don't pay anything different. Now, if you incorporate, you have to make sure that you're doing the right type of thing there. And I'm not going to try to get into that incorporation. I'm not a lawyer, I happen to be related to a lot of lawyers, but I'm not a lawyer, so I won't tell you that there may not be some minor differences if you incorporate. So you would have to talk to a lawyer and certainly a financial consultant to make sure you were doing things correctly. Well, there's a lot of advantages. Unfortunately, there's a lot of disadvantages or downsizes to being a sole proprietor. Now, you don't get time off. You don't get vacation. There are no benefits. There's no health care. You and the business are intertwined. You can't divorce yourself from the business. The business can't divorce you from you. Because you're a individual, and most individuals who start a business have limited resources, your potential for growth is limited. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you couldn't morph into something even greater. I mean, Bill Gates and his partner started out with a government contract that they were able to break the code on the day before the contract was due. And of course, that was the beginning of Microsoft. Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and I forgot the other partner, started Apple. It was very small. Now, they weren't sole proprietor partnership, but it started very small. Of course, they were successful and got much larger. Hewlett Packard started out in the garage. David Hewlett, and David Packard and Bill Hewlett, I believe those are their names. David Packard's right. They started out in the garage. So yeah, these things, but of course that's a partnership, but it's similar to a proprietorship, sole proprietorship, in the fact that usually have small amounts of money. And of course, the other thing it talks about there is management difficulties, and one of that means is that simply this, that the owner doesn't always have all the time that he or she needs and to do the things that would be able to be done if he or she had 4, 5, 6, 7 people being managing certain things. And of course, you have to look at the amount of time that was listed in there, and this slide just shows you the amount of time that people work well and above 40 hours a week. Time commitment to a small business is really just exponential. You really can't put a number on it, I don't believe. Now, these are the types of major partnerships in the United States: general partnership and limited partnership. In a general partnership, everybody has equal responsibility for the business's debts. That's key to listen to. Equal responsibility because they're having equal responsibility for running the business. Limited partnership is different, where one of the or more of the general partners is limited, and his or her debt requirement is only to the amount of money that he or she put in, and this person usually has little or no say in the general management or the general running of the business on a day-to-day basis. We have master limited partnerships and limited liability. Now, this gets us back to the limited before, and perhaps I just jumped ahead. The limited liability means you're only limited to what you put in. And notice here also, personal assets to the outcomes only of acts and omissions of those people under their supervision. So if you had a limited partner who only put money in, that's all he or she is limited to, is that money, because they're not supervising anybody else. Master limited partnership, if we go back to the first bullet, looks a lot like a corporation, but people are taxed as a partnership, which is much different than corporation. Well, obviously there's advantages to partnerships. The old saw, two heads are better than one or more than two heads. You can get people in different capacities within this. For instance, years ago, I knew people who owned a medical supply company in northern Indiana. One man ran the office. He seldom went out, met customers. His partner was the salesperson, and he went out. And so they had a good partnership. One guy was focused on running the day-to-day operations. The other guy was out beating the bushes to find business. You have more resources, so you should have a better chance of survival. And again, just like a sole proprietorship, there are no special taxes. The disadvantages are fairly similar in some circumstances to the sole proprietorship. Unlimited liability. That means you cannot divorce yourself from the business or the business be divorced from you. You and the business are one and the same. Well, you're two in the same if you're talking about two people here. And that debt comes to you. You have to pay that back. Obviously, they can have differences of opinion, and because of the way a contract may be set, it may be difficult to terminate. One of the things that always becomes contention is what happens after the original partners decide to retire. Should they or could they pass their part ownership on to a child? Well, unless the contract specifically states otherwise, the answer to that question is yes. There was a family restaurant here in Cincinnati for a number of years. It's out of business now. And it was owned by, I believe, 4 brothers. And a son of one of the brothers is married to a cousin of mine. But the brothers got together and they said, we're not going to bring any of the children in. And that's not going to happen. And so they had that pretty well ironclad. Now, that didn't mean to say that one of the children couldn't have started working for them, but somebody left. One of the brothers left. It wasn't going to devolve to one or more of that share wasn't going to devolve to one or more of his children. So if you get thinking about a partnership, and I don't mean to use any of this to dissuade anybody who's thinking about getting into a partnership. But one thing you want to make sure is that you have a good synergy between the two of you, or more, that you get along, that you have the same kind of thought processes. Well, not so much thought process, but you have the same goals and objectives in mind. Now, thought process, people are going to think differently, but you should have the same long-term vision, et cetera, et cetera. And that the person or persons that are you want to partner with are bringing something different to the table than you are, so that you're really building something that is an underpinning from what everybody brings to the table, not just what one person brings to the table. And partnerships have to really be able to work together, and it has to be entered into with good feelings and things of that nature. And by all means, have a good solid contract that everybody agrees to. Obviously drawn up by a lawyer to make sure we're on the right track. But it's just important. And this gives you a laundry list of of picking your partner in the second last bullet down. Do you trust this person? And maybe that's really the biggest key of all. It shouldn't be buried at the bottom. Maybe it ought to be at the top. And then like the same goals and things of that nature. Very important that you have a good relationship. Okay, this is something that's in the text. I always suggest that you look at those, but certainly not something that you're required to work. C corporations. This is the traditional corporation that we see in the United States. Notice that it is a state chartered legal entity. A corporation does not exist unless we and some government say it exists. It's a social construct. If you go out in the world and look for a corporation someplace, you're not going to find it. A corporation is not a building. It's everything that goes into that organization to make it a corporation. So it's employees, it's land, it's equipment, it's all sorts of things. The key here is it has authority and liability separate from its owners, those people who own stock in the company. Whether the company is publicly traded or not is irrelevant. Company issues stock, then they have stockholders. Difference between a publicly held company and a privately held company that issues stock. A publicly held company has to provide a quarterly report. A privately held company does not. So that's something that we want to keep in our mind. But it has the authority to act without consultation of the stockholders. Now, one of the things that happens every year, companies that are corporations, they send a stockholder report to their people and they ask them to vote, to the stockholders, and ask them to vote on certain parameters of running the business. One is voting for the board of directors. Usually there's some provisions that are put forth before the stockholder. And companies are supposed to pay attention to what stockholders say. They don't always do that. So we find more and more activists within the stockholder community. Here's the advantages. Limited liability. Because of its size, it can raise more money. I won't agree with the term perpetual life, but the ability to live longer is certainly around. Can change ownership easily because of size, because of the amount of revenue coming in. The ability to attract and retain top quality employees is much greater than a small company. And finally, down at the bottom, which we just talked about, separation between ownership and management. Now, this just gives you an idea of how the management is done within a corporation. And you can see this slide 5.5 on page 129. Owners were the stockholders that elect the board of directors, and the board of directors elects the senior or hires the senior officers, CEO, CFO, people of that nature. And then you have the rest of the pyramid coming down. America's largest corporations, we're not going to pay any attention to that. That's another gee whiz slide. Here are the disadvantages of a corporation. A lot of paperwork. It's costly to begin. There's 2 sets of tax returns. We'll talk about that in a minute. And there tends to be, and as I alluded to before, a little bit more conflict between stockholders and the board of directors. But too often, and I'm not going to beat this to death, too often the board of directors doesn't pay attention to what the stockholders are saying. And so that has to be thought of. It has to be taken into consideration. This is just mistakes that companies have made when they brought out new products. I suppose my favorite is Coca-Cola. When they brought out new Coke, lasted 71 days on the market. Question rises here who can incorporate? And the answer is anybody. But normally anybody is an individual who decides he or she wants to incorporate will not issue stock. So if you incorporate or I incorporate, the advantages to me or to you are not the same as a corporation. Now we're going to talk about S corporations that have become fairly common in the United States. And now there is some question as to whether the laws that allow S corporations need to be tightened. I'm not going to discuss that because, pardon me, that's not part of the text, but we have some potential nefarious dealings with S corporations, and that probably needs a little closer scrutiny. Notice that it is something, again, that I said was set up by the government, and that here we're talking about the federal government. It is something that we think is a corporation, but the tax is as either a partnership or a sole proprietorship, which is essentially the same. They do have shareholders, directors, and they do benefit from limited liability. But notice again that the profits are taxed just as if it were a corporation, a partnership or sole proprietorship. Cannot have more than 100 shareholders. People who must be either citizens or permanent residents of the United States. One class of stock. By the way, we'll get to stock later in the text, but normally we talk. Well, matter of fact, we're going to talk about this chapter. I forgot about that. Preferred stock or common stock. No more than 25% of income can come from passive sources. Passive sources are things like rent, interest, and things of that nature. If the corporation loses its S status, it cannot operate like that for a minimum of 5 years. Now, an LLC is similar to an S corporation, but without the eligibility requirements. Again, some limited liability, choice of taxation, flexible ownership rules, operating flexibility. Disadvantages is, and this is a big one at the top, no stock, so there's no ownership is not transferable. So that means that the lifetime of this type of organization is limited. Fewer incentives, there are taxes, and there is paperwork. Obviously, that doesn't, paperwork doesn't stop. The sole proprietor has paperwork too, so we can't say paperwork doesn't have to come around. Mergers and acquisitions are a little bit different. Than we're into a new ball game here. And a merger is what it says, are two companies joined together. When we think of merger, we think of joining of equals. I'm here to tell you that that is not always the case. Usually there tends to be one entity in the merger who has senior status. Acquisitions, when one company buys out another. Simple as that. Different types of mergers. Vertical merger. Two companies in different stages or different arenas of a related business. Horizontal, two like firms joining together. And conglomerate is when firms join, but they're in unrelated businesses. A leveraged buyout, and we don't see these as much as we did. They may be coming back simply when employees and or stockholders or management attempt to buy out. Now, I'm going to say here, I'm not contradicting myself, buy out the stockholders in a company, but it could be some stockholders as well joining with management and employees to buy out other stockholders. And this just talks about the type of leverage buyouts that we had in the United States and the amount of money that has been involved over a period of years. One of the things that we are going to talk about now is franchising, and we'll talk a little bit more about franchising in Chapter 6. And franchising is simply buying an agreement. And that's what you're really doing. You're buying an agreement from a business that allows you to operate in a certain geographical area and sell their products or goods. The advantages of being a franchise are right here.
Did you think about it before you said you would take them?
I'm sorry, what's the question, please? Hello? Hello? Are you asking me a question? Hello?
Oh, sorry, my fault. Sorry about that.
Okay, all right. I mean, if you want to ask a question, if you want to ask a question, if you want to ask a question, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. But I'm just listening along. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's all right. When you get into a franchise, you have some advantages. You're getting into a known business, and that business is going to help you not only advertise, but they're going to help you market. At the same time, you're the personal owner. And hopefully you're with a national recognized name, and you're going to get some management assistance, you're going to get some financial assistance. And the big key is, if you're in to start your own business as a franchisor, or as a franchisee, excuse me, your chance of success is much greater than opening a normal sole proprietorship. There are, however, some disadvantages. In many cases, it's a huge startup cost. There's a shared profit. That simply means that you have to pay a royalty or fee, if you prefer, to the company as a percentage of your sales. Whatever that happens to be, as being your contract. You have to do what the franchisor tells you to do. You don't have much choice in that matter. It's a big issue with the Subway folks. They got that, the franchisees in the Subway system got that straightened out, but it was virtually impossible for these folks to make a profit because of what they had to do. Now they've given some latitude to be able to buy fresh produce and things of that nature. You're restricted to the area in which you can operate unless you open another one. You can't go outside that territory without permission. And then, of course, obviously, there are people out there that are not on the up and up trying to sell franchises. We wish that weren't true, but that's so. Notice about half U.S. companies, women own about half of the U.S. companies, but only 21% of the franchises. Interesting. Don't know why. Domino's is going out of its way to, and by the way, there's been a lot of literature and newspapers, etc., about Domino's going out of its way to attract minority franchisees. Home-based franchises, they have some advantages. We'll talk a little bit more throughout the course about home-based franchises and home-based businesses. There's pluses and minuses. You're working from home. You're not having to pay extra money, but you do have isolation and, of course, the long hours that go in with any type of sole proprietorship, whether it's franchise or something else. E-commerce and franchising. I'm not going to speak a lot about this. It's just like e-commerce anyplace else. You have to make sure that you have a good website. People understand it. You're prompt and things of that nature. It's something that we see is continuing. Global franchising is around. Notice that the most popular target for U.S. is Canada. As I have not mentioned before, but I'll mention now, Canada is the United States' #1 trading partner. If you think it's China, that's not correct. Canada is #1. Here's some other places where people are trying to move into more franchising. If you're going to pick a franchise, stick with what you know or what other people know. I shouldn't say don't look outside the box, but that's particularly interesting because people like to think outside the box. But when it comes to franchises, you really have to be careful. The biggest thing I can tell you about a franchise is if you're looking for a franchise, it comes down to 3 words, and they're all the same: location, location, location. Obviously, the franchisor is going to help you pick the location, but you need to be in a place where you get a lot of traffic. Now, whether that traffic is on the internet or the traffic is foot traffic down the street, it's irrelevant. You have to be someplace that you're going to get a lot of traffic because that's what franchises depend upon. And then finally here about this thing is don't assume that the franchise is going to pay off. You need to have a get out position, a fallback position, and make sure if you get into a franchise that you read the contract carefully. Too many times people don't read contracts, and then they say, well, I didn't see that. Well, it was there right along. They just didn't pay any attention to it. I'm not going to talk too much about cooperatives, except that they're businesses owned by the people that use them. And there's a number of co-ops worldwide. These are democratic institutions. They control the business by electing the board of directors that hires professional management, etc. 5:30. We've come to the end of chapter 5. Any questions? Okay, let's take about a 2-minute break. We'll come back and do chapter 6, entrepreneurship and starting a business. Thank you. All right, short break, 5:32. We're back. Chapter 6, entrepreneurship and starting a small business. Our learning objectives are to explain why people take risks and become entrepreneurs, discuss the importance of small business in the American economy, and we're going to look at some of causes of failure, small businesses. We're going to hopefully summarize the ways to learn about how small businesses operate, analyze what it takes to start and run a small business, and then finally the advantages and disadvantages small businesses have in entering global markets. And one of the things I want to tell you is not so much the advantages and disadvantages, but that many times small businesses don't think about entering the global marketplace when in fact they have as good opportunity to be successful as the big boys and big girls. We talked about entrepreneurship a little early on in the course, and it's simply accepting the risk of starting a business. You know, there are people who are really good at that. And what I mean by that is there are people who take that risk and will start business after business after business. Their object is to start a business and get it off the ground and sell it to somebody else and start again. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that really is entrepreneurial spirit at its greatest. Now, this particular slide gives you a look at people who started small businesses. And we know them as large businesses today. DuPont, Avon, Amazon, and other businesses. And you can see this down on page 152 in your text. There's other people who developed things when they were in school. This particular slide says earning while learning. This particular slide talks about 4 reasons to start your business right away. You don't have any obligations. You can survive on what you have, and you're not too concerned about when the next dollar is coming in. You're not disrupting your career because you really haven't started one. And of course, if you're thinking about school, you can obviously start a business while in school. Never too old to be an entrepreneur. My favorite story is about Colonel Sanders, the gentleman who started Kentucky Fried Chicken, we call it KFC today. Colonel Sanders and his wife had a motel in Corbin, Kentucky, and Interstate went through and effectively took his business away. At 65, or perhaps just a little bit older, when he was collecting Social Security, he and his wife started what became Kentucky Fried Chicken. He would dress in the colonel suit that you see in the character. By the way, I don't like those advertisements. I think that's not done very well. But Colonel would dress up in the white suit and cane, and his wife would dress in an antebellum costume, and they would go to restaurants and they would prepare the chicken with their secret ingredients of herbs and spices. The first restaurant that he was successful in getting to take on this was a restaurant in Salt Lake City, Utah. Don't have any idea how he got there. And all he asked for was a nickel for every chicken dinner that they sold using his herbs and spices. And of course, now it's a major corporation, or part of a major corporation. Why do people take risks? Here they're listed right here, but rather than talk about the other 3 opportunities right there at the top. And that's where opportunity ought to be. And if you have an opportunity, you usually are into an opportunity because there's a challenge. Those things have to be thought of when you want to do that. You can look in the text and it gives you an idea whether you like to be an entrepreneur. If it says you're not, don't be discouraged, because some people change over a period of time. Many things hold us back from being entrepreneurs. And we talked about them before: having debt, having children, having other obligations. And if you can put those aside, and you have an idea, the sky's the limit. These are profits what Michael Dell did. He started making computers in his college dorm room. So these are not rags to riches stories. These are stories that we hear that actually people really did and became very successful with. Well, this is what it takes to be an entrepreneur, according to Nichols, McHugh, and McHugh. And I think that we should really pay a little bit of attention to this. And one is being self-directed. And I think that's really very key to this thing. But there are other ones in here that are just as important. And then one of them, I think, besides the other ones, and you could look at them, is a tolerance of uncertainty. And you can manage that. You can live with that. It's not going to bother you It's not going to keep pulling you back someplace. You're able to see it for what it is and go forward. Entrepreneurship's not for everybody, but it can be. But you have to be schooled in understanding that. That schooling, I'm not talking about going to school and learning something. That schooling comes from yourself. Now, this particular slide talks about starting a business while at school, but it's the same as if you want to start a business and you're not in school. What you're trying to do is find a problem or a need. I would change it around to say not a problem or need. I would say a need, something that people need, they have to have, or a want. And as you look at the videos, and one of the videos you're going to look at is pillow pets. I know that young children think that they need a pillow pet, but the answer to that is no, they don't. They wanted a pillow pet. And the woman who started the business and her husband saw that as a want, and they were very successful in doing what they wanted to do. So find a need or a want, find a market that is after your product. That's what really is going to set you apart from anyone else. And this slide just goes on and talks about a little more of what I said, maybe a little bit better way than what I said it. It fills it out. Notice the fourth bullet here, which is really key, that you can get the product or service to the customers you're trying to get it to before the window of opportunity closes. Now, what that simply means is you're able to get there firstest with the mostest. I know that's bad language, but I want to use it anyway. Before anybody else comes in and starts trying to steal your thunder. And that's very important. It's to understand that and have that imbued in you, so you can move forward. And the other thing it talks about is being able to sell the product at a reasonable profit, reasonable price, and earn a profit. And let me step back from that a second and say one of the things that hurts a small business is the thought process is the only way I can get into the market is to offer a less expensive price. And so you get into the market and you start offering a less expensive price, and all of a sudden you understand that if I keep selling at this price, I can't make any money. What's the problem with that? It's difficult to raise prices. So it's not getting in with the lowest price. It's getting in with something that is going to set you apart from competitors. And if you're a small business, it's usually service. It's something unique that you can offer that nobody else can do. That's what's going to set you apart. It's not that price business. Yeah, you need to be somewhere where you can make a price and maybe be a little bit less than the competitors, but you can still make money. But if you go in and try to lowball, and then you find out you can't make any money, it's a real problem, because it's darn difficult to raise prices. Micropreneurs are people that actually start a business and they are small business people, and they intend to remain small. They don't intend to get larger. It kind of runs against the grain when you think about that, because people usually get into business and they want to increase doing what they're doing. But these people found a niche for themselves, and that's where they want to be. Home-based businesses are growing. I think we all know about that. I don't really like to spend a lot of time on that, and I'll talk about this now, and I'll talk about it later in the course. If you get into a home-based business, make sure that the zoning regulations in your community allow it, and look out for taxes and tax breaks and things of that nature, which will help you. And of course, you really have to be very disciplined if you start this, because when you walk across the threshold, wherever that threshold is, now I'm at the business end, and I'm no longer a husband or wife, mother or father. I'm actually at the business. That's really difficult. You really have to steel yourself to do that. It's not easy. There's isolation, maybe tough to get customers. As I talked about, restrictions, zoning restrictions may hamper you, etc. And you have to check about homeowners insurance and things of that nature. Any business that home-based or otherwise, if you're a sole proprietor, really has the same advantages and disadvantages of any other sole proprietor business. It's just your home, and you have to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And you probably must be, I won't say probably, you have to be more disciplined if you're going to run the business out of your home than if you have to leave home every day and go to some location where the business is located. These are the downsides, and I think we know what they are. I mean, we don't have to stop and think about it. We're home. I talked about isolation before, zoning restrictions. You have the distractions of being at home. The comforts of family are great, but if you're trying to run a business, they're not. And so you have to make that separation. Online businesses, they've grown, they're going to continue to grow. Notice here in 2013, it was 8% of all the retail business in the United States, and it's going to continue to grow. The big thing about that is it's a crowded market, and whatever you decide to do, you have to be able to do something to set yourself apart from your competitors. This is just telling you what you do to kind of set yourself apart from the competitors, although it says a little bit differently than what I'm saying. I think the big one is establish an identity and be friendly. You have to, and be responsive. You have to do those things. It's no different than brick and mortar as far as those kinds of things go. The difference is you're physically separated and you may not be physically interacting with your customers. An entrepreneur, although people will tell you there is no such word, is a person who is an entrepreneur, but who works for a business. The classic story here is Art Fry with 3M Corporation. Art Fry is the essential founder of Post-it notes. Short story, Art Fry was trying to come up with an adhesive. 3M, by the way, if you don't know 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, Scotch brand cellophane tape, that's the thing that most of us think about. And so what Fry found out was he whatever church he belonged to, he was a member of the choir, and the adhesive he was trying to work didn't do a very good job, but it helped him keep the place in his hymnal. And so he thought that was a good idea, and so he sent a note to his bosses and said, hey, guess what about this thing that wound up being called Post-it notes? And nobody was interested. Now, what is really interesting, I shouldn't use that word twice in a row, is that 3M is known as an entrepreneurial company. It will allow an employee who comes up with what looks to be a good idea to start a business within the business for up to 2 years, give the person a budget and employees and resources, etc. And after 2 years, if nothing happens, he or she goes back to where they came from within the corporation, no questions asked. So then Fry decided, well, the only way I can get their attention is to send them a memorandum and put a sticky note on it, Post-it note on it. Well, then they got attention. And they decided that this was a good idea and they were going to produce them and market them. Well, they couldn't get any of their vendors, those people who bought 3M products to sell to the general public, their wholesalers, if you will, to take the product. They didn't see a market for it. So 3M had another brilliant idea. And they took Post-it notes and they found the executive secretaries of corporate 500, Fortune 500 companies and sent them a note with a Post-it note. Well, of course, they wanted to buy Post-it notes, and you know the rest of the story. There's a lot of knockoffs on Post-it notes today. But what that tells us is that everybody, even those with the entrepreneurial spirit, don't always recognize a good idea when they see it. So, you know, it's not, gee, why didn't I think about that? It's also, why didn't I think about it, and then why didn't I have the persistence? The government is trying to, not only our government, being the federal government, but local governments are trying to foster entrepreneurship, and they have things like enterprise zones and incubators, which help small companies out with administration and things of that nature, offering low rent and reduced taxes. We know what small business owned are. We've talked about them as proprietorship, but we want to give them a little bit more cachet, if you will, and that is they're not associated with somebody else. Now we're not take the franchise thing out of your mind. Now we're talking about an independent small business, usually operated by mom and pop or one of the two, and they're not dominant in the field in which they're operating. And then they're small in relation to other businesses in the same area. Now this is a gee whiz slide that I really want to talk about because it has some important information here for us that we don't always think about. 28 million small businesses in the United States account for over 50% of the GDP. Now don't think about that slide we showed before, because that was talking about revenue. We're not talking about GDP. That GDP and revenue are two different things. Since 1995, they generated 65% of all new jobs in the United States. That's significant. And 80% of us first job was in a small business. I can tell you mine was. I worked for a small private laboratory here in the Cincinnati area after I got out of college back many moons ago. Small businesses succeed based upon these two bullets more than anything else: personalized customer service and the ability to respond quickly to customers' needs. You can take everything else away, and if a small business doesn't have these two characteristics, it's probably not going to succeed. Now, these are famous failures. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but people who did things and didn't succeed, and then obviously became successful some time later. These are causes of small business failures, and you can see this in your text. Very important to pay attention to, because it gives us some kind of an idea of what happens. You find it on the top of page 164. And a lot of what it says is that people get in without planning. And you really have to have a plan to get into business. Now, I can tell you without fear of contradiction that there are businesses, small businesses that became large businesses that are operating in this country today that did not have a business plan when they started. And you know, you could take that to the bank and the bank will pay interest on it. You'll earn money. But that does not mean that you shouldn't think about having a business plan. It's very, very important. And there's all kinds of things in here why they're failures. Not enough capital, didn't know the market, tried to do too much at one time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not paying attention to finances, not having good management. We can talk about those things all we want, but I can tell you that if you don't have a good business plan, it's not going to help you. Now, I attended a conference last January in Florida, and one of the presenters talked about business plans really were worthless, but he got that from somebody else. And I kind of challenged him on that. I was trying to get some feedback so I could get some of his work uploaded to the course, but I've never been able to contact him, and so I've never been able to do that. He admitted that some of the people that he used for his research really were anti-business plan, so they didn't do that. And some of what he had to say had some thought process to it, that some of the investors didn't really pay a lot of attention to business plan. But one thing about a business plan is, whether you use it or don't, it channels your thought process. It makes you go back and look at what you're doing, and it gives you something to work from. That doesn't mean to say that you have to be a slave to it. So you need to think about, if you want to get into business, about having a good, solid business plan. And these are increasing small business success. I'm not going to go through this. You can see this at the top of page 165. And you need to think about this. You need to understand, we need to understand, I don't mean to be preaching at you, you need to understand that if you want to get in and you get into small business, you have to be unique. And you have to be able to do something much different than the big players in your field. You know, you may be an irritant to them. And they may say, oh, well, you know, we have to worry about that. And that's fine. It's fine for you, probably doesn't make a difference to them. But you'd have to do something. I know I'm repeating, but I think this is important to think about. You have to set yourself apart. You have to make sure that you're doing something that somebody else either isn't doing or can't do. Otherwise, you're just me too. And if you're me too, the question should come to any consumer's mind, why do I want to do business with him or her when it's simply me too? Now, this ethical decision question here, again, something that I suggest that you look at, but you're not required to. Those ethical decisions are always a good thought process that gets your creative juices thinking. Page 166. These are the major functions of a business. Major functions, they go on with the major functions of management, which are planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And we'll talk about those when next week. But these are the things you also have to do, major functions in business, knowing customers and keeping records and things of that nature. Now here we come to the business plan. And I've already talked about this, and I'm not going to beat this to death. But what I am going to say to you is that normally business plans are developed for two reasons. This is my thought, two reasons. One is to give you a general framework of what you want to do, to kind of keep you in focus. Because starting a business there's a lot of things to do. So you want to keep the focus as sharp as you can. The second reason that you have a business plan is in case you want to try to find some outside funding. And so you go to a traditional lender, which is kind of difficult today, or some other type of lender to try to get money. And they're going to look at a business plan. That takes me back to where I was in Florida last year. The gentleman who did the presentation said that a lot of the investors he talked to said they never look at the business plan. Well, I don't know whether that's true or not, but business plans are something that just, I think is really going to help you. And down here they say it's mandatory if you're going to talk to a banker, and I think that's probably quite true. Business plans are not created overnight. If you have more than one person involved in the business plan should be written by one person, obviously with input from others. Now, you should not have more than one person writing the plan, and maybe one person write the plan, another person edit the plan. The most important part of the business plan is the executive summary. The executive summary is written after the business plan is completed, not before. If you write the executive summary first, then the business plan must follow the executive summary. And the executive summary has to sing. Because if you do get to a lender, that's probably the only thing that he or she is going to have time to read. Executive summary is short, relatively short, 2 to 3 pages. 3 pages may be too much, certainly no more than that. And it's a condensed version of what you're going to have in the rest. If you get into business with your family, remember that you need to have a contract. All the other things on this slide are fine. I don't dismiss any of them, but there needs to be a contract so that everybody understands what his or her responsibilities are. That there's more problems with families when things are not clearly articulated. And we all know that there can be a lot of problems with families in the same business or business together, and there's no sense creating any more confusion than what's already there. Of course, the family can help you with capital, and then, of course, other sources of capital are listed here. One is always listed as a venture capitalist, and I just like to point out that there's nothing wrong with venture capitalists, but they want their money. And they want their money when they want it, not when you want to pay it back. So if you get involved with a venture capitalist, make sure things are clearly laid out for you so that you understand. I have a good friend of mine who's in the home security business and has been in the home security business for as long as I've known him. And he started a business with a friend, well, I shouldn't say a friend, a business associate, and they got some money from venture capitalists, and they started making money, and the venture capitalists came and said, we want our money. Long story short, my friend no longer has that business. He's still in business, but he doesn't have that business because they had to liquidate to make sure they paid back the investor, the venture capitalist. That's not meant to say venture capitalists are bad people. It's just meant to say that they want their money, and when they want it, you better have the money ready for them. There are some community development financial institutions. They were formed in the early 1980s. These are people that can really help you. They're a little bit different than traditional lenders, would be banks. And there's something to seek out. And one of the things that you want to do, we're going to get to it here a little bit later, the next 4 or 5 minutes before we close, and that is if you're interested in a small business, go down to the federal building in your locality and get them with the Small Business Administration people. They have a lot of stuff they can help you with, and they're more interested in your success than they are doing something else. Here's some new crowdfunding rules, crowd investing rules to follow. I'm not going to talk a lot about that. What I do say to you is what's right here on this slide. Connect with the Small Business Administration. You can go to sba.gov and get some information from them. And then if you have a large federal building in your community, by all means make an appointment with them and stop and see them. There are some other small business investment companies. Again, I would say make sure that you talk to Small Business Administration folks before you start with this. Really can really help you out. Small business development centers, same thing. They'll help you evaluate the feasibility of your idea. They'll help you develop a business plan. And there's nothing wrong with getting competent help. You have to know your market. And you have to know the demographics of your market. We'll talk more about that when we get into marketing in chapters 13 through 16. But that's something you really need to know. You need to find out about the market, whether the market is big enough to support your idea and your company or not. And if it's not, then you're in the wrong market. You need to go someplace else. You need to know what your customers want, the same thing we're talking about here. And again, talking with the Small Business Administration people are going to help you. This is the difficulty for all people who become entrepreneurs, and that's managing employees. They get wrapped up in their idea, and I don't mean that to be bad. It's just that's what they're focused on. And they have other things that they have to be concerned about, management of employees, and payrolls, and things of that nature. And so this is critical for a small business. Once the small business person is able to expand to find the right type of person that he or she can rely on to do the things that they're either not comfortable with in doing or that other people have expertise. Get an accountant. They're not inexpensive, but get an accountant. Those people can direct you the right way in the right places to make sure that you're paying your taxes properly, that you ways to save on taxes, etc. Don't rely just on your help. Same thing with legal. Stop and see the legal people. Sometimes you can go to the Chamber of Commerce in the local area and they will direct you to lawyers. Or you can call the Legal Aid Society and they'll direct you to the right place. Really important that you get the advice that you need from experts. It's going to be costly, I understand that. But there's no sense in going off based upon what Harry or Joan told you is right and it turns out to be wrong. Again, we're going to talk more about marketing research when we get to chapters 13, etc. But it's something that you really need to do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now because we spend more time on it in those chapters and talk about determining where to locate and things of that nature. Other forms of help: commercial loan officer. Of course, you'd be going to your bank, insurance agents, and then the Service Corps of Retired Employees, SCORE, S-C-O-R-E. Many times you'll find them located with the Small Business Administration people in the local federal building. 5 things that mistakes a business owner made. I think the second one is probably the one we have to pay attention to: hiring the wrong people, become complacent, and then failing to see new opportunities. So those are all things we need to think about. Small businesses abroad. I'm really not going to talk a lot about this. If this is something that you're interested in, if you get into small business and you decide you want to start a small business, those are things you need to talk to the Small Business Administration people. And what you would need to talk to them about is getting you hooked up with the import-export people from the Department of Commerce that can point you in the right direction to get you started. Well, that's at 6:05. I have concluded what I want to present to you tonight. I hope it was beneficial for you. Let me know if you have any questions. If you don't have any questions now, that's fine. You can send me questions tomorrow via email or post something in Campus Web, and I'll answer them for you as quickly as I can. I will copy this course and have it uploaded to Campus Web and send you the link for YouTube tomorrow. So if there are no questions, thank you for your attention and thank you for being here. And I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Good night.